Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
I'm writing from Orange County, California, in desperate need of some advice. Before I plunge into the legal maze, I want to gauge whether it's worth my time and effort. Here's my predicament. I own a townhome and diligently pay my monthly HOA fees, expecting that such payments would ensure the maintenance and upkeep of my home. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case. For nearly a year now, my roof has been leaking. My HOA is supposed to cover roof repairs, so I contacted them as soon as the issue began. They initially sent out a company that tarped my roof and pointed fingers at my skylight, claiming it was the source of the leak. Trusting their assessment, I went ahead and replaced my skylight just before we got hit with heavy rains. To my dismay, the leak persisted, unchanged by the skylight replacement. I reached out to the HOA again, reporting the continued leak and the growing mold problem. They sent out the same company, who only suggested tarping the roof again and vaguely commented that, "It sounds like the roof." This supposed fix didn't happen. The guy left without even climbing up to inspect the roof. Following more rainstorms, I kept the HOA updated, stressing that no temporary fixes had been implemented and the situation was worsening. Their lack of concern was palpable. Eventually, they sent out 2 different companies to assess the water damage and mold. Both firms concluded that extensive repairs were necessary. The second company was particularly alarmed by the situation. They left an industrial-sized dehumidifier and air purifier in our home because the extent of the mold made them uncomfortable with my wife, our newborn, and me living there. As a result, our electricity bill has skyrocketed, adding financial strain to our already stressful situation. Throughout this ordeal, I have meticulously kept all emails, pictures, and documents. The HOA has repeatedly mentioned that they would cover the mold remediation if it's deemed to be from the roof leak. However, now they've pushed everything to waiting for board meeting approval. It's been nearly 2 months since I first notified them about the mold, and there's still no word on when the next board meeting will occur. My calls and voicemails go unanswered, leaving me feeling completely in the dark. The mold is not just an inconvenience, it's a health hazard. My wife and I have started to get sick, and I've had 3 respiratory illnesses in the past year, all requiring multiple prescriptions. The symptoms keep recurring, and I can't help but think the mold is to blame. Living in this environment is unbearable, especially with a newborn in the house. I'm at my wit's end. I just want the mold gone. I want a safe home for my family. But I don't know if pursuing legal action is the right move or if it would just be a waste of time. Does anyone have any experience with a situation like this or can offer some insight? Your advice would be greatly appreciated. As the weeks turned into months, my patience wore thin. The promises from the HOA began to feel more like stalling tactics rather than genuine attempts to resolve the issue. Every time I pressed for updates, I was met with the same vague responses: "We're waiting on the board's decision," or "It's under review." My frustration reached its peak when another heavy rainstorm rolled in, and our living room ceiling started to sag ominously. Water dripped steadily into buckets we had strategically placed to prevent the carpet from getting soaked. This was no way to live. One night, after another futile attempt to get a straight answer from the HOA, I sat down with my wife to discuss our options. We were both exhausted, physically and mentally. The constant dampness and mold had taken a toll on our health and our spirits. Our newborn had developed a persistent cough that kept us up at night with worry. It was heartbreaking to see our child suffering and knowing that we were stuck in this toxic environment. We decided it was time to seek legal counsel. We couldn't continue living like this, and it was clear that the HOA wasn't going to take action unless they were forced to. I contacted a local attorney who specialized in HOA disputes and explained our situation. After reviewing our documentation and hearing our story, she assured us that we had a strong case. She explained that under California law, the HOA had a duty to maintain the common areas and that their negligence could make them liable for the damages we had suffered. Feeling a glimmer of hope, we moved forward with the lawsuit. The attorney filed a complaint on our behalf, detailing the HOA's failure to address the roof leak and the resulting mold damage. The legal process was slow and stressful, but we were determined to see it through. As we waited for our court date, the mold problem continued to worsen. The dehumidifier and air purifier ran constantly, driving our electricity bill even higher. The noise from the machines was a constant reminder of our predicament, a dull hum that kept us on edge day and night. One particularly bad day, I came home from work to find my wife in tears. She had spent the afternoon trying to clean up yet another water leak, and the strain was too much for her to bear. I held her and promised that we would get through this, though I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I knew we had to do something drastic. I reached out to the local news station, hoping that some public exposure might pressure the HOA into action. A reporter came to our home, and we shared our story on camera, showing the water damage and the mold that had overtaken our living space. The segment aired a few days later, and the response was immediate. Neighbors reached out with their own horror stories about the HOA, and the increased scrutiny seemed to light a fire under the board. They scheduled an emergency meeting to address our complaints. Despite the newfound attention, the board's response was underwhelming. They acknowledged the problem but continued to stall, claiming they needed more time to evaluate the repairs. Our attorney advised us to push forward with the lawsuit, and we did. The legal fees were mounting, but we were determined to see justice served. Finally, after months of back and forth, our court date arrived. We presented our case, backed by a mountain of evidence documenting the HOA's negligence. The judge listened attentively, and it was clear that he was sympathetic to our plight. The HOA's lawyer tried to downplay the severity of the situation, but the evidence was undeniable. Photos of the mold, expert testimony on the health risks, and our personal accounts painted a grim picture. In the end, the judge ruled in our favor. The HOA was ordered to cover the full cost of the roof repairs, mold remediation, and our legal fees. Additionally, we received compensation for the emotional distress and health issues we had suffered. It was a bittersweet victory. While we were relieved that justice had been served, the experience had left us scarred. The repairs took several weeks to complete, and during that time, we stayed with family to avoid further exposure to the mold. When we finally returned to our home, it felt like a weight had been lifted. The leaks were fixed, the mold was gone, and we could breathe easily again. Reflecting on the ordeal, I realized that standing up for ourselves had been the right decision, even though it was a difficult and costly one. The HOA's negligence had put our health and home at risk, and holding them accountable was necessary. I hope that our case would serve as a warning to others in similar situations and that the HOA would take their responsibilities more seriously in the future. Looking back, I wish we had taken action sooner. The toll on our health and well-being had been significant, and no amount of compensation could erase the stress and fear we had endured. But we had made it through, and our home was finally a safe place for our family. As we settled back into our routine, I felt a renewed sense of determination to ensure that we would never have to endure such a nightmare again. I'm an OC dealing with a very similar situation. Condo has aged roofs and no money in reserves to repair. Reach out for a consultation with a lawyer. I'm sorry you're having to deal with that. I'm dealing with a leak in my first-floor condo caused by a leak from the roof. HOA has been worthless. Trying to say it's plumbing related. It's not, and legal is my next step. Get a lawyer should have been your first step and tell the HOA they have wasted enough time already and will be sued if not fixed immediately. Or you will pay to fix it yourself and send them the bill. Do not wait in limbo. As soon as they started stalling, it was time for the legal route. I'd be concerned about their lack of concern. Mold grows. Has your HOA been increasing the reserves for roof repairs, replacement? Did you get the information on what repairs the roof company said were necessary? Why did you replace the skylight? Was it old when the last time it was caught? What is the HOA's reserves reserved for? Most insurances don't cover mold. The response and the lack of urgency on your behalf could affect how the HOA tries to pin blame on you for not mitigating the skylight damage better. Yep, pass the blame back to you. Your insurance won't cover something that now would be seen as negligence. I don't envy your situation, and it was lawyer time months ago. Not sure what the HOA is waiting for because clearly the damage had gotten bad. Water can also affect the foundation.
My parents have always lived modestly, scraping by on a small income to support themselves and my grandmother. Their English isn't great, which complicates things whenever they have to deal with official matters. Recently, they've faced a new, daunting challenge that's pushed them to the edge financially and emotionally. 6 months ago, our next-door neighbor's condo caught fire. It was a devastating blaze that completely gutted her home. Thankfully, it didn't reach my parents' condo, though it did cause some exterior damage. The neighbor was promptly relocated to a temporary home while her place underwent restoration. One day, out of the blue, my parents received a notice from the Homeowners Association, HOA, informing them of a significant increase in their monthly payments. Their HOA fee jumped from $150 to a staggering $500. This sudden spike was attributed to increased insurance costs due to the fire. For my parents, who were already living on a tight budget, this was a crushing blow. They simply couldn't afford an additional $350 a month. Panic set in as we scrambled to understand the situation and seek solutions. Should we consult a lawyer? Could we negotiate with the HOA? These questions swirled in our minds, but finding answers was proving difficult, especially with the language barrier my parents faced. Adding to the complexity was the fact that the HOA president was someone who didn't even live on the property. She rented out her condo to someone else and had assumed the leadership role without being officially appointed. This woman had a history of dubious actions, such as hiring her own family members for maintenance tasks instead of contracting vendors, making it hard to track actual expenses. Despite the seemingly bleak situation, we decided to gather as much information as possible before taking any drastic steps. We wanted to understand our rights and the HOA's responsibilities better. I turned to online communities for advice and support, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. People shared their experiences and offered suggestions, which gave us some hope. While we were compiling questions to confront the HOA president, my mom received an unexpected call from her. The president claimed she had found a way to reduce the increased fee. Instead of the new $500 monthly payment, the fee would be reduced to $300 for the next 3 months, including the original $150 fee. It was a temporary relief, but it still wasn't ideal. The timing of the call was suspicious. My mom and another neighbor had been planning to speak with a lawyer about the situation, and it felt as if the president somehow caught wind of our plans. Was it just a coincidence, or was she trying to placate us to avoid legal scrutiny? In the meantime, my parents and I discussed our options. The temporary reduction was better than nothing, but it didn't solve the underlying issue of affordability. We still needed a long-term solution. Consulting a lawyer seemed like a necessary step, even if it was daunting. We reached out to a legal aid service that offered assistance to low-income families. They provided us with valuable advice and agreed to help us draft a letter to the HOA. The letter outlined our concerns about the fee increase, the lack of transparency in the HOA's decision-making process, and the president's questionable practices. While we waited for a response, we continued to gather support from other condo residents. Many of them were also unhappy with the HOA president's management and the sudden fee increase. Together, we discussed the possibility of calling a meeting to formally address our grievances and demand accountability. During this time, my parents were incredibly stressed. The uncertainty of their financial situation weighed heavily on them. My grandmother, too, felt the strain, as she depended on my parents for her well-being. It was heartbreaking to see them struggle, knowing they had always worked so hard to provide for our family. Finally, we received a response from the HOA. They acknowledged our letter and agreed to hold a meeting with the residents. This was a small victory, but it gave us a glimmer of hope that we could resolve the issue. The meeting was tense. The HOA president tried to justify the fee increase, citing the fire and the resulting insurance hike. However, many residents, including my parents, questioned her management practices and the lack of transparency. They demanded to know why family members were hired for maintenance tasks, and why the president, who didn't live on the property, was making unilateral decisions. Despite her attempts to deflect, the president couldn't ignore the growing dissent. The residents voted to form a committee to oversee the HOA's activities and ensure greater transparency. This committee would also work to negotiate a more affordable and sustainable solution for the increased fees. In the weeks that followed, the committee worked diligently to review the HOA's finances and negotiate with the insurance company. They discovered that the initial fee increase had been exaggerated and managed to secure a more reasonable insurance rate. As a result, the monthly HOA fee was adjusted to a more manageable amount, significantly less than the $500 initially imposed. For my parents, this was a huge relief. They could finally breathe a little easier, knowing they wouldn't be pushed into financial ruin by the exorbitant fees. The experience had been a harsh reminder of the importance of community and standing up for one's rights. Looking back, it's clear that without the support of the other residents and the legal advice we received, we might not have achieved this outcome. The ordeal also highlighted the need for proper management and transparency in homeowners associations. My parents learned valuable lessons about advocacy and the power of collective action. As they settled back into their routine, my parents remained vigilant about the HOA's activities. They continued to participate in meetings and stayed informed about any decisions that might affect them. It was a hard-fought victory, but it brought our community closer and ensured that everyone's voices were heard. Throughout this challenging journey, we found that even in difficult times, there's always hope and the potential for positive change when people come together and support one another. My parents' struggle with the HOA demonstrated their resilience and the strength of our community. If the costs of the association have legitimately gone up because of an increase in costs, i.e. insurance, or a need to deal with the damage to areas that you're commonly responsible for, there's very likely to be little you can do. This is what a HOA, condo association, is for in its most good faith and bane form. They should, however, have a right to look at the books. It might be time to start scrutinizing them. Since the recent high-rise collapse in Miami, Florida, there has been a lot more scrutiny around condos. Due to so many of them being scarily behind on repairs and maintenance, and having underfunded reserves, which has made a lot of insurance companies either completely drop condos or reevaluate their policies, causing prices to increase across the country. I would also look into the rules for your HOA board members. Every HOA neighborhood has qualifications for board members, which usually includes they be in good standing, current on HOA dues, free of criminal background, and most importantly, an actual resident. If the president doesn't physically live in the neighborhood, that could very well disqualify her from serving. Also, in regards to work being done, most HOAs have stipulations about receiving so many quotes from licensed vendors before work is done, with exceptions for emergency calls. But even then, it must be a licensed vendor to do the work in case they mess something up.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.